All right, we're going to have our little shuffle as everyone goes in and out. As you'll notice, I got all the technically challenging panels, blockchain, ontologies, so you're in for a treat. Woo! Okay, for this, we're going to... Hey, guys. I can't believe it. They had this whole stage that whole time, and boom, they had to stop. No. Okay, so blockchain. We're going to start with just a simple what the blockchain is. Level set, this is not about cryptocurrencies. Just drop all of that out of your brain. Think distributed ledger. I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to dive in. So Tejas, you want to start with you?
Sure, thanks. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for spending the afternoon with us. My name is Tejas Bhatt. I'm the Senior Director of Food Safety Innovations at Walmart. We've been dabbling in blockchain for the last 2 years, trying to learn about an industry application or an enterprise application that's beyond Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So you will not get any investment advice from me unless it's buying Walmart stocks.
All right. We'll take that with a grain of salt there. Okay.
Hi, I'm Raja Ramachandran, co-founder and CEO of Ripe.io, introducing a blockchain of food to basically tell consumers and businesses where their food comes from, how is it made, how is it distributed, and effectively the story of food. And so our measure is around quality and sustainability. And yeah, happy to be here. Thank you very much, Michael. And this is a fun conference.
All right, Raja, we're going to have you do this first. I want you to explain to us what the heck a blockchain is. And if you can do it in the context of food, even better.
I better. My investors are going to be pretty pissed off if I can. So, I mean, a blockchain, I think that, the best analogy that we use, in essence, it's an alternative database that really allows you to create a singular story about any type of item, whether it's a transaction, whether it's a piece of lettuce, whether it's a shipping container. And it does so by creating collaboration amongst the different players. So where there's low trust, where there's many players, there's many data sets, centralized databases are really expensive. So blockchain is almost, imagine a multi-tab spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet allows a tab per participant. And that participant gets permission to be able to see other people's information. And so you share this one common event. So if it's a financial statement, you all look at the same thing. And that's the real key. It is a shared single record. And that's what's missing in virtually any business, whether you're doing banking transactions, commercial transactions, and on down that list. So in essence, a blockchain is really a digital twin of the existing item to tell the truth of that story.
Oh man, you threw in digital twin. Now we're just jargoning it up. Okay. So think about adding scalability and accountability. That's how I always think about it in layman's terms. So let's talk about Walmart, because this is a perfect example. You guys just introduced a blockchain for lettuce so we could track E. coli. So how did that come about? Why is the blockchain good for this?
Yep, great. So, Stacey, we're not tracking E. coli. We're tracking the lack of E. coli on the lettuce, right? So just clarifying that.
Fair point.
But really, to your point, the goal was food safety. That was the motivation for Walmart to embark on this 2-year journey. We wanted to ensure that we were providing safe foods to our customers. And the reason blockchain is the perfect enabling technology to solving the problem of traceability and transparency in the food system is because, as Raja just described, it is a supply chain with low trust. We really don't know all the stakeholders that are involved in getting those fresh leafy greens all the way from the farm to our stores. And with blockchain, we can actually enable better collaboration, and it actually enables trust over time. Because of the immutable nature of a distributed ledger and a blockchain, it's actually incentivizing our suppliers to put more accurate data on the blockchain the first time. So it's improving data quality. I'm going to link this for a second to the previous panel you were on, which is big food data and analytics. As we get more and more data from our food system, we run into this big barrier of data accuracy and how reliable is that information. Right? It's not just about more data, but it's about better data. And blockchain technology is allowing us to get better data from our supply chains so we can make better decisions about creating a safer, smarter, more sustainable food system.
Okay, so I have to ask, because when I'm thinking about blockchain, I'm thinking about my computer, mining coins, and I know this isn't cryptocurrency, but there is a hash that has to happen, there's computing, and no plant that I know of, no lettuce I know, has a little computer in there. So what are the mechanics of making this process happen? And it could be either of you answering this, because
yeah, I'm happy to take it. The approach we've taken is, so as you know, or probably know, blockchain requires a consensus model, right? To write any entry onto the ledger, you need consensus from the nodes that are running the blockchain. The approach we have taken is we're not building open, trustless blockchain like Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies where you can stay anonymous. In our blockchain, it's a private, permissioned, enterprise-level blockchain where you have to prove your identity first. So essentially, you are a trusted party once you start transacting, and then you enable the visibility to those ledger entries based on permissioning. So in addition to hashes, we also have permissions to enable those.
So is it the farmer who is going to opt in and get permission here, and then I'm just going to put this data in and then share it up the chain?
That's correct. So every stakeholder in the supply chain is putting their data onto the blockchain. They still own that data on the blockchain. The other big myth that we have busted is not every stakeholder in this blockchain ecosystem has to implement a node, which is computer intensive, that is resource intensive and all of that. But we need enough diversity of players to implement nodes so that we get this trusted system to work in consensus.
All right, so we talked about food safety, lack of E. coli. Let's talk about other things that this can be useful for, or other things the blockchain is useful for.
Sure. So we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. I mean, we work with a restaurant called Sweet Green, and this is sort of our farm-to-fork customer. We also have the middle of the supply chain. We work with the Dairy Farmers of America and also the National Pork Board, and we just recently started working with two large consumer products good companies. So what it allows us to do is to define the use of the blockchain within the context of what outcomes do people really want. So with Dairy Farmers, for example, we've done a lot of work around sustainability. It's less the traceability component of it is already, it exists because they're a centralized authority that have a lot of the information. What they want to do is basically they want to unearth the stories about what actually constitutes sustainability, and they want to know if that information is given to a consumer or their institutional customers like a Starbucks or a McDonald's, will they sell more milk? Is it, is the engagement with local consumers, with their local farmers, true? Is that something that they really would like to see happen? So that's one piece of it. We're working with Sweet Green, where since last year we've been tracking tomatoes, and so the idea was to basically create a perfect tomato through sensors, soil management, sustainable, putting IoT devices in trucks. So you literally can create this entire tapestry of a tomato. So we're actually creating flavor profiles on the blockchain so that you can actually figure out, does this make sense for my menu management, for our customers, and so on. And then with CPGs, they're all asking, well, what story does the consumer really want? It's one thing to do traceability, meaning I can get a QR code and I can actually see the history of things. But I don't think a lot of consumer products goods companies have figured out the digital experience of food. There's an analog experience, but the digital experience, honestly, I think is not exactly discovered. And what do people really want? And the question can't be, well, are they willing to pay more? That's an important factor as an economic piece, but what actually engages that customer with their food? And I think we've heard it before on panels, things like personalization, on your personalized devices, a smart kitchen, and so on. And all that requires a language of food. We just heard it on the previous panel.
I'm sitting here thinking about, do I need a digital experience with my food? Because I just want to eat it. But, so we've got food safety, we've got this kind of consumer marketing, we also have this concept of tracking something to create a better flavor profile. Any other good examples where the blockchain makes a lot of sense? Yeah,
so I'll add a couple more to that. Once you have the foundational traceability and you have visibility into how the food is flowing from farm to our customers or to the fork, we can then actually do a lot more analytics with it, especially as Raja mentioned, if you have IoT devices and sensors along that supply chain. It's fascinating. I'm learning so much about the fact that, two strawberries that were harvested from the same field at the same time that reached the same store may have very different profiles in terms of quality based on the environmental conditions they went through. So better quality, better products to our customers is another application beyond food safety. The one that I'm personally excited about is, you may have heard of this large romaine outbreak that happened earlier this year. And the advisory from the regulatory agencies was, don't eat romaine from Yuma, Arizona. Well, as a consumer, when you go to your fridge, can you tell if the romaine in your fridge is from Yuma, Arizona or not? No idea. So what do we do as consumers? We throw it. As retailers, we had no idea if the romaine on the retail shelf was from Yuma or from California or from Salinas or anywhere else, right? So we had to throw it. Food waste is a big issue, and this helps us solve food waste in a way that we could not have without the accurate data about traceability and where that food came from.
And that's actually it's kind of a horrible way to educate consumers about this, because you're like, hey, if you scan this now, you'll learn more about the blockchain and you won't get diarrhea or something awful. So, yay. Let's talk about the infrastructure needed for this and kind of computing, because you're talking about like the perfect tomato and sensors, and I'm like, that is a lot of work for one tomato. And we're talking about lettuce, and we haven't even made the whole salad yet. So are we going to have computers everywhere? What does this look like when we're trying to build this out for all types of food?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the technological infrastructure is kind of organically growing. I think with the food trust, it's establishing a basis for large food companies, who can afford such a thing, to establish effectively this foundation for blockchains and some of the data. But they do represent, a significant portion of consumption, but there's a vast number of farmers, suppliers, distribution companies that are not on board. They all have disparate systems. So at some point, we all have to talk to each other. So back to, does this mean we just flood, trillions of little sensors in every little, piece of food that we're going to get? I would imagine Bosch and, Dell and some of these other big sensor companies would love that. But the reality is that a lot of companies have the data, particularly like distribution companies. And there's always some questioning about, like how do we break that opacity down? Surprisingly, distribution companies have come out and said, well, we don't want to be Kodak. And so that means we have to take a look at what's the infrastructure. So in a way, you can actually begin with vast amounts of data and then start to federate it or distribute it out. So you don't necessarily have to have this enormous investment in localized edge computing technologies that every farmer has to get one. Because in the end, when you go to the farmer and if you bring an iPad, you're off the farm. If you tell him you got to enter stuff on the iPhone, he's like, when? The labor force is not consistent and so on. So that's still a real problem, is like, how do you get farming? And we're spending a ton of time there.
Yeah, I second that. Honestly, the previous panel that you moderated, where you talk about the application of ontologies and the market for that, for us to talk to the two different blockchain solutions that we're working with, you need a common standard for describing the data. And for the supply chains that Walmart deals with, including our leafy green supply chains, we have small farmers in those supply chains that don't have the resources, the technical know-how to implement new technologies, right? So giving them a pre-printed label to stick onto a case as they're packing on the field is good enough for them. So we're not talking about massive investments in computing or technology across the board, but certainly we're talking about the decentralization of data and the democratization of data that traditionally has resided within the power of the big companies, right? Now we are actually enabling smaller and medium-sized companies to participate in this ecosystem.
So I scan this and I get the data, like this leafy green was picked in this particular field, and then anyone scanning that up the chain. So got it. Okay. So at Walmart, I don't know what you've done in your life, but if you're thinking about dealing with the blockchain and you're at a consumer products company, if you're at Walmart, if you're a farmer, how do you have to start thinking? Is this a change in jobs? Is there a new role in the world for these people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was at a panel in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago where I was sharing the stage. There was a farmer who was on a panel who said that there are more tech jobs in ag today than there have ever been. And it's because of these kinds of technologies that are coming with sensors, with IoT devices, with big data, with blockchain. As we are essentially commoditizing data, there are different skill sets that we need in the labor force to manage this data and to do analytics with this data. So I don't think that this is a transformational change for the food system, but I don't think it's as disruptive by design because we want to still have a food supply while we're making these changes, right? We can't really restart the food system, and that's why I think these changes are more evolutionary than revolutionary. The end vision and the impact is going to be completely transformational, but we're taking baby steps towards it.
Yeah, I mean, with our company, I mean, every time we hire, it seems like it's a complete transformation in the role. You know, we have flavor specialists on staff, we've got chemists, we've got agronomists, we've got farmers, we have supply chain and operational specialists, and so it's an interesting amalgamation of multiple skill sets that really have not worked together before. And so in a small company, in a way, you know, you can kind of mash them together, and hopefully the chemistry will work because you've got a common. At a larger institution, I used to work at large banks. I mean, it takes time to work out that sort of multidisciplinary, you know, like deployment. But, you know, we work with a number of universities where we're, you know, have an internship program. I had a Tuck Dartmouth student, you know, that was going to go to an investment bank. He worked with us for the summer, and he's coming on board. Like, that kind of change is sort of coming. It's not like every potential investment banker is going to jump into food, but you know, I think that that's telling, and it's exciting to hear about and see.
Okay, and so when what we're talking about here is this massive transparency. In Walmart's case, or in this lettuce case, you have a closed network. So how do you think about sharing that information? Obviously, there are laws like if you do have lettuce with E. coli, you do have to tell people about it. So how do you think this transparency changes both the legal and regulatory environment, and then also how you might work with partners and rivals?
Yeah, again, the way we designed this blockchain ecosystem in partnership with IBM Food Trust, we actually worked with 7 of our large suppliers and 2 of our competitors because we think food safety is a pre-competitive issue. And that's why we invited our 2 other retailers to work with us on designing the system, developing the standards for this. What's interesting is we don't want all visibility at all times for everything, right? Because that creates legal implications, that creates liability. We do want to know when there's a problem, but because this is a permission system, we don't get visibility to everything at all times. When the regulator comes knocking on our door during an outbreak investigation, for example, we can now deliver the traceability data, the information about where the food came from in a matter of seconds to minutes, where today it takes days to weeks, right? So the romaine outbreak that I referenced before, it took FDA 3 months to get to the farms where the romaine came from. That's not good enough. So this is not a closed system because anyone can join the blockchain food trust ecosystem. Whether they're a Walmart supplier or not, it's available to them to work with their supply chain stakeholders. And eventually, because blockchain is still new in this environment, we expect other solution providers to come up and evolve and mature, where we will then have to talk to those different solution providers, and the data would need to flow through multiple solutions before it gets to Walmart.
I was like, that's time, not a question. Gotcha. So I have to ask, because is there anything blockchain can't do, you guys? Where does it not work out?
Yeah, I mean, you have to ask 3 questions, right? Number 1, is the environment that you enter have like almost a complete lack of transparency or low trust? So all the partners in the ecosystem have to have that as a condition. Second, you know, you have to have some kind of single shared record that is like a core foundational desire. In other words, I'm looking at, let's say, a bank statement. You know, do I trust that statement? There's reconciliations that go on all the time. So in that sense, a desire for that. And then running a series of logistical transactions that trace back to the original. And that desire to have that traceability is a key thing. And so when you look at it that world, and also it's important that you don't do searches on blockchains. In other words, you can't really do that. I mean, you can, but you'll be waiting endlessly. It won't be the 2 seconds that they do mangoes, for example. There's different ways to achieve speed. So, the blockchains are really set for sometimes actually a limited set of things. The key is collaboration. Once you change the existing state of ecosystem from a disparate, opaque, non-collaborative, world to one that is, then the blockchains become actually very valuable. And all of a sudden, the cost of it becomes extremely low, and so on.
I'll add one thing to that. I agree with all of that. Blockchain is not going to solve food safety for us, right? That's not a reasonable expectation. What it helps us do is when there is a problem in the food system, it helps us get to the root cause faster and therefore learn from what went wrong and put in protocols, practices, interventions to prevent that from happening again. It will prevent future outbreaks, but it cannot prevent all outbreaks. So I don't think it's a silver bullet for everything, but it does get us closer to a safer, smarter, more sustainable food system.
Okay, I have one quick question because I just realized, I'm like, blockchain, it's immutable. This is great for currencies. Food is actually consumed, and then you have this immutable record of a strawberry from, decades ago. Does this make sense? What happens here?
Yep, great. Governance matters. So we spend a lot of time. In fact, the technology was the easy part. The hard part was setting up the governance for what happens to the data over time. Because to your point, we don't want that data to sit there forever. And the way we design this is essentially, because of laws around data retention for a business, we can put expiration dates. So while the data might still reside forever, you can remove permissioning to see that data after a certain period of time.
Right. And to add to it too is that I look at it slightly differently in that a permanency of a record of a strawberry, because it's a seasonal item and the soil conditions at different parts of the world make such a difference in that flavoring, like being able to compare it to different soil types, to different geography types, to other types of seeds and DNA. So what it does is it serves as a basis for intelligence that really most farmers have in their head. But even they are surprised at some of the things that are unveiled. We had many of those experiences about beet growers, tomatoes, lettuce, about there's assertions being made, but if you're able to compare in history where Tejas is right, you have to have permission to be able to go ahead and unlock a record, and you give people private keys and so on. But intelligence on the data is an unbelievable possibility that I think is here, that I think these blockchains provide.
When we're all gone, there will be yottabytes of data that we leave behind. All right, everyone, thank these guys. They are awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.